The cruelest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who were supposed to love you first. My name is Emily Langston. I'm 33 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've carried a kind of ache that never quite goes away. It doesn't throb, doesn't scream. It hums quietly. Like a low-frequency sound you can't pinpoint but can't ignore. It's the sound of being forgotten while still in the room. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in a house so polished and orderly it felt more like a museum than a home. My father, Robert Langston, was a name you'd hear in aerospace circles, CEO of Langston Dynamics, the kind of man who shook hands with astronauts and stood under spotlights more often than sunlight. At home, he ruled not with a fist, but with a gaze, cold, measuring, and always slightly disappointed. Then there were my brothers, Zach and Mason, 3 and 5 years older than me, respectively. Golden boys. Zach, the born leader, captain of everything. Mason, the quiet genius, destined for MIT since he was 12. My father called them his legacy. He said it often enough that the word began to sound sacred. He never called me anything. I wasn't the kind of child who demanded attention. I tried to earn it. I did well in school, colored inside the lines, and sometimes way outside them. I was that kid who built castles from cereal boxes and tried to launch bottle rockets in the backyard. I wasn't reckless. I was curious. But in a house where control and predictability were prized, curiosity was just another liability. What hurt wasn't that I was punished. It's that I was ignored. There's one memory, sharp, stubborn, that won't fade, no matter how many years stack on top of it. It was my 8th birthday. I'd spent weeks making a gift for my dad, a model jet plane, hand-cut from cardboard, painted silver with leftover craft paint, even labeled with his company's logo. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I remember wrapping it in tissue paper and waiting near the door like a puppy for him to come home. He arrived late, as always, still on his phone when he walked in. I followed him to his office and handed him the box with both hands, like it was sacred. He opened it, looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, nodded absently, and set it down behind him. Later that night, I came back downstairs to get water. That's when I saw it. In the kitchen trash can. Crushed under the remains of a takeout container and a crumpled receipt. My silver plane. He hadn't even said thank you. I stood there barefoot, staring at the mess of tissue paper and wings snapped in two. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because somehow I'd already learned there was no space in that house for feelings that weren't useful. From that night on, I stopped giving him gifts. Not out of spite, but because I realized he never wanted them. Not mine, anyway. Over the years, this became the rhythm of our household. My brothers soared, and I stayed grounded. Family dinners felt like performance reviews. Praise was currency, and I never had enough to spend. My mother, Diane Langston, was there. Always present, but never involved. She floated through the house like a shadow, polite and distant. She wasn't cruel, just careful not to rock the boat my father steered. Sometimes I wondered if she noticed how invisible I'd become. Sometimes I hoped she did, but she never said a word. I learned how to disappear without leaving the room, how to listen without being heard, how to want without asking. By the time I turned 13, I could recite Zach's football stats and Mason's GPA from memory, but I don't think either of them knew what I liked to read, or that I had once won a regional science fair, or that I still built things in the garage. Quietly, alone. They didn't ask, and I stopped offering. It's funny, the things that shape us. Not the grand betrayals, but the quiet omissions. Not what was said, but what was never said. And for me, the deepest scar wasn't left by a slap or a scream. It was left by a silver jet in a trash can. I don't remember exactly when it started. Probably somewhere between the 4th grade science fair and my first failed attempt at soldering wires without burning the counter. But somewhere along the way, the word creative became my cage. At school, being creative meant I was inventive, curious, a little ahead of my time. I once built a working model of a Mars rover using scrap electronics from our garage. My teacher called it visionary. I came home that day beaming, clutching my blue ribbon like it was the key to my father's attention. But at home, creative meant unserious, impractical, decorative, something to be entertained by, then dismissed like a child's drawing, hung on a fridge for a week before it curled and fell. I remember the exact tone my father used when he first said it in front of company. I was 12, showing off a homemade gravity experiment during one of his business dinners. I thought I'd impressed everyone, until someone asked Robert if I'd be following in his footsteps. He didn't even look at me when he said, "Emily's the creative one. We'll see where that leads." Then he smiled. The room laughed politely. I did too. I had to. From that moment on, it stuck. That word, that label, it wrapped around everything I did, whether I was sketching satellite designs on the backs of napkins or explaining black hole theories over breakfast. To my father, and even to my brothers, I was just the creative one. It was their polite way of saying I wasn't credible. Meanwhile, Zach was the leader, the future executive, bold, composed, forever groomed for a corner office. Mason, the quiet, analytical one, had already published a paper on AI optimization before he turned 20. At every dinner table conversation, it was a parade of their accolades. And me? Oh, Emily. She's always making something. She has such a wild imagination. Emily's different. Different. That was the word people used when they didn't know where to place you, when you didn't fit the mold, didn't mirror their image. Different meant unmeasurable, unpredictable, unrelatable. And in our house, where everything had to be charted and proven and weighed, different meant lesser. The irony? I wasn't the artsy, dream-chasing type they made me out to be. I didn't want to be a painter or a poet or a stage actress. I wanted to design spacecraft. I wanted to understand propulsion systems and gravitational slingshots and planetary alignment algorithms. I wanted to touch the stars, not with sentiment, but with science. But I didn't look the part, I guess. I wore Converse instead of heels. I got excited about engines. I read Carl Sagan at 11 and programmed simulation software before I was old enough to drive. Yet in that house, in that family, I was stillest the imaginative daughter. Not the ambitious one, not the technical one, just creative. One time, when I was 16, I made it to the state finals for a national robotics competition. I built an autonomous rover that navigated a maze using infrared sensors. My physics teacher cried when I won. My dad didn't come to the event. He had a critical investor lunch. When I brought the trophy home, he said, "That's cute. You're really good at those things." Then he turned to Zach and asked how his football season was going. That night, I sat in the garage, the place where I hid most of my projects, and stared at the trophy like it meant something. Like it was supposed to prove a point. But the truth was, no matter how high I climbed, he had already decided which ladder mattered. And mine wasn't on his wall. If my father's silence was sharp, like a blade, then my mother's was soft. A quiet that smothered rather than cut. It didn't leave bruises, but it left echoes. Diane Langston, my mother, was not cruel. I need to say that out loud because it matters. She didn't yell. She didn't belittle. She never raised her voice, not once. Her hair was always neat, her tone always mild. She folded the laundry with perfect corners and knew the exact ratio of cream to sugar in my father's coffee. Her role in our house wasn't to challenge. It was to maintain peace, but peace can be another kind of prison, one built from denial and polished floors and smiles that don't reach the eyes. Growing up, I used to think she was simply unaware of how left out I felt, that she didn't see how Zach and Mason were praised while I was ignored. I clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would notice the imbalance and tilt the scale, even a little. But she noticed. Of course she noticed. I remember one night, I was 11, when I had been wrongly accused of breaking one of my father's engineering models. It had been Mason, actually, but I didn't blame him. He was just curious. Still, my dad came down hard, lecturing me in front of everyone at dinner, ending with, "If you can't take responsibility, you'll never earn respect." I wanted to speak up, but my throat tightened. The kind of tight that makes your heartbeat audible in your ears. Later that night, I curled up on my bed, sobbing into my pillow. That deep, shaking kind of cry where you don't want to be heard, but you still wish someone would come. And someone did. I heard footsteps, then a pause outside my door. It was her. I could see her shadow under the hallway light. She stood there for maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds that stretched like a lifetime. I thought she'd open the door, sit on the edge of my bed, brush my hair back and tell me it wasn't fair, that I wasn't wrong, that she saw me. Instead, she turned and walked away. It wasn't loud. There was no slammed door, no confrontation, just the faint creak of floorboards fading down the hall. That was the night I realized something. My mother would never choose me, not in the ways that mattered, not if it meant choosing against him. It wasn't that she didn't care. I believe, in her own way, she did. She remembered my favorite breakfast. She slipped notes into my lunchbox sometimes, soft reminders to be kind to myself. But when the air in the house grew cold, she folded into herself. She became invisible right alongside me. Except she chose it. I didn't. The older I got, the more I understood her silence wasn't ignorance. It was self-preservation. She had long ago learned that peace in our home was maintained by absence, of conflict, of reaction, of opinion. She didn't pick battles. She didn't pick at all. And so, I stopped waiting for her to stand up for me. I stopped hoping she'd say my name in the conversations that mattered. But that didn't stop me from wanting it. Because there's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from having your mother 5 feet away and still feeling completely alone. Leaving home wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming match, no slamming doors, no final stand. Just a quiet Saturday morning, 2 suitcases, and a one-way ticket to California. I was 17, freshly accepted into Caltech on a full academic scholarship. I hugged my mom, shook my dad's hand, and walked out the front door. No one asked me to stay. At Caltech, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, weightlessness. Not because life was easy, it wasn't, but because for once, I wasn't constantly shrinking myself to fit someone else's frame. I studied aerospace engineering like it was oxygen. I stayed up for nights in labs, blew through electives, taught myself coding languages just to keep up. While most of my classmates scrambled for internships, I was quietly building a reputation, one built on competence, not connections. Eventually, I landed a research internship at JPL, then a full-time position, then a promotion, and another. Over time, I rose through the ranks to become Director of Mission Systems for one of NASA's most ambitious unmanned missions. I designed control architectures. I led failure analyses. I presented before advisory boards. I earned it, every inch of it. I wasn't just creative anymore. I was precise, technical, relentless. I turned all the quiet pain of my childhood into fuel. And yet, in every holiday visit, every family gathering back in Austin, my title was still a footnote. If mentioned at all, my father would talk about Zach's recent promotion at his firm, Mason's new startup, even if it hadn't turned a profit yet. When people asked about me, he'd say, "Emily's out in California, still working on space stuff." Space stuff, that's what he called it. One Thanksgiving, a family friend asked if I was still doing the science club thing. I laughed politely. My father didn't correct them. What hurt most wasn't the ignorance. It was the choice. He chose not to say it. He chose not to acknowledge me. And just like when I was a child, everyone else followed his lead. There's a strange kind of erasure that happens when you succeed outside of someone's narrative. You become inconvenient, embarrassing even, like a piece that doesn't match the rest of the puzzle they're trying to show the world. So, I learned to stop hoping. I stopped bringing up my work. I stopped offering updates. I sat at dinner tables listening to conversations about quarterly profits and fantasy football, and gently pushed my mashed potatoes around while they discussed legacies. And in those moments, I realized something. I could build spacecrafts capable of navigating the void of interstellar space, but somehow, I still couldn't reach my father across the dinner table. They talked about me like I wasn't in the room, like I never had been. And maybe, in their minds, I hadn't. Because I wasn't the story they wanted to tell. I still remember the exact moment it arrived. Monday morning, gray light spilling through the blinds. My inbox was a mess, and my coffee had gone cold. Again. Then came the letter. It came in a cream-colored envelope. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing meant to impress even before it's opened. Langston Dynamics Retirement Gala. Honoring Robert Langston, a legacy of excellence. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My name, handwritten on the front in perfect cursive, made my stomach twist. Not because it was welcoming, but because it felt like bait. An elegant lure cast into waters my father hadn't dared touch in years. I hadn't seen him in person since my mother's birthday dinner 3 years prior. Even then, we'd exchanged maybe 12 words, most of them polite, all of them hollow. So why now? I placed the invitation on the kitchen counter and left it there. For days, weeks. I walked past it like it was a wound that hadn't scabbed yet, delicate, ignored, but always there in the corner of my vision. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part, the one that still flinched at the idea of being uninvited from a family moment, couldn't quite let it go. I brought it to therapy. Yes, I was in therapy. Still am. I started going about a year earlier, after I realized that even my biggest career milestone, being named Director of Mission Systems, had left me feeling numb. Like I'd climbed a mountain no one asked me to climb, only to find the summit was empty. Dr. Patel, my therapist, was the first person who ever said, what you needed wasn't validation, it was permission to stop asking for it. She didn't push me about the gala. She never does. She asked questions. She let me sit in silence when I didn't have answers. But one day, after I'd been circling the subject for weeks, she said something that stuck. Closure isn't about what they give you. It's about what you stop giving them. I couldn't stop thinking about that, especially at night. There were moments when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was it. If this gala would be the final page in a story I had rewritten 100 times in my head. Maybe he'd finally see me. Maybe he wouldn't. But at least I'd know. And then there were moments I wanted nothing more than to stay away, to break the cycle, to not show up just to be made invisible again. I drafted a polite RSVP decline. I deleted it. I Googled flights to Austin, then closed the browser. The internal war was exhausting. But beneath the indecision, I think what I feared most wasn't going and being ignored. It was going and still hoping. Because hope, for someone like me, was dangerous. It made you vulnerable. It made you 12 years old again, holding a trophy in one hand and waiting for a father who never showed. But eventually, I chose to go. Not for him. Not even for my family. For me. Because sometimes, you need to walk back into the place that hurt you. Not to be welcomed, but to prove to yourself that you can leave it on your own terms. The gala was held at the Hilton downtown. Sleek marble floors, champagne towers, and too much cologne in the air. Everything gleamed, from the glass chandeliers to the oversized posters of my father lining the walls. Robert Langston, visionary, leader, legacy. I walked in alone, my heels clicking a little too loudly on the polished floor. A few people glanced my way. Some smiled politely. None recognized me. That was the first reminder. The second came at the registration table, where a young assistant struggled to find my name on the list. Oh, Langston? Are you with Zach or Mason's party? I gave her a tight smile. No. I'm Emily. She blinked, then nodded slowly, scribbled something on a name tag, and handed it to me upside down. So that was the third. The ballroom was crowded, men in suits laughing too loudly, women with practiced smiles clutching flutes of champagne. Somewhere in the middle of it all stood Zach and Mason, surrounded by clusters of admirers. Zach spotted me first. Well, look who made it, he said, pulling me into a half-hug like I was a distant cousin. NASA Barbie in the flesh, Mason added with a smirk. It wasn't malicious, just old, tired, a nickname from years ago that never quite fit and never stopped being used. I smiled thinly and said nothing. The fourth reminder came when the slideshow began. It was projected on a massive screen at the front of the room, a cinematic tribute to my father's career. Dramatic music swelled as images flashed across the screen. Him shaking hands with astronauts, speaking at launch sites, ribbon-cutting ceremonies with Zach by his side, early boardroom meetings with Mason seated proudly behind him. Picture after picture, but not one of me, not even from childhood, not a blurry candid, not a group photo, nothing. It wasn't just an omission, it was erasure, intentional, precise, like I had been edited out of the legacy he was so carefully curating. My mother, Diane, stood near the edge of the room, her hands clasped in front of her like she was holding something fragile. She caught my eye once, held it for a second too long, but she didn't come over. Instead, she turned and walked toward the buffet. I spent the next 20 minutes hovering at the edges of conversation circles, answering questions like, "Still doing that science stuff? So what exactly do you do at NASA? Like, you build rockets? Wow! You must be so smart. I could never do math." The tone was always the same, curiosity mixed with condescension, like my career was a fun fact at a dinner party. Zach interrupted once to say, "Emily practically runs things out there now. Director of something or other, right?" Then he laughed and clinked glasses with a colleague, as if he'd just done me a favor. There was no space for me here, no seat at the table, no line in the speech, just champagne, cold smiles, and the same ache I'd carried since I was 8. I considered leaving, just walking out, taking the elevator down, and never looking back. But something kept me there. Maybe pride, maybe spite, maybe the simple desire to witness it all with clear eyes and a steady spine. To see, once and for all, what I was never truly part of. When the lights dimmed and the MC took the stage, the room fell into a respectful hush. The kind that only happens when power walks into a room. And that night, power was my father. Robert Langston took the stage like it was a launch pad, confident, collected, every gray hair in place like part of a brand. The applause was thunderous. Some even stood. He raised a hand modestly, as if to say, "Please, I'm just a humble genius." Then he spoke. He started, of course, with the numbers. How he'd taken Langston Dynamics from a garage startup to a national institution. How the company had partnered with aerospace giants, mentored young engineers, shaped the future of flight. He thanked his colleagues, his board, the investors. And then he moved on to family. He turned toward the crowd and gestured to Zach and Mason, seated front and center. "I've been lucky," he said, "to have not only built something lasting, but to see it carried forward. Legacy, after all, isn't about what you build. It's about who continues the work." He looked directly at Zach. Zach brings fire to every room. He leads like he was born to do it. Then to Mason. Mason brings brilliance, calm precision, quiet wisdom. The crowd nodded, smiled, clapped softly. My brothers looked pleased, maybe a little smug. I didn't blame them, they were used to it. Then he paused. The room hushed again, waiting for what came next. He scanned the audience. And for a split second, I thought maybe. Just maybe. But then he smiled. That familiar, practiced boardroom smile, and said, "Of course, not every child is meant to carry the torch. And that's okay. Not everyone is built for the sky." A few people chuckled, unsure whether it was a joke. The rest just nodded, as if he'd said something profound. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just stared at him. That one sentence, light, casual, almost poetic, hit me harder than anything he'd ever said to my face. Not built for the sky. Not everyone is meant to fly. It was so gentle, so civilized, and yet it sliced me open like a scalpel. Precise, cold, final. In that moment, I wasn't a woman who had spent 15 years designing flight systems. I wasn't a director. I wasn't even his daughter. I was a ghost in the room, a reminder he refused to name. It felt like being shot in the chest in front of 100 people, but with a smile. I looked around the ballroom. No one seemed stunned. No one gasped. This wasn't new to them. It was just another polished line in a long speech about legacy. Only I heard it for what it was, a dismissal. A deliberate erasure, dressed up in charm and applause. 30 years of reaching, proving, enduring, reduced to one line. And suddenly, everything in me went still. No anger, no tears. Just clarity. I didn't plan to walk up there. Not really. I'd rehearsed a speech. Something neutral, polite, hollow. A few words about legacy, gratitude, maybe a joke or two. But after what he said, I knew I couldn't do it. Instead, I stood. The room went quiet again, but this time with confusion. I hadn't been announced. I wasn't on the program. But I walked toward the stage with steady steps, my heels echoing louder than the applause had minutes earlier. In my hands, a small black gift box. Simple, unadorned, tied with a single white ribbon. My father turned as I approached, brows slightly raised. Not warm, not cold, just expectant, like he couldn't remember what I might have to offer. I stopped in front of him, held the box out, and said, clearly, calmly, "From your biggest disappointment. Enjoy your retirement." His face didn't move, not even a twitch. I turned and walked off the stage before he could respond, before anyone could clap, before the silence could be interpreted. I didn't look back. I'd parked 2 blocks away. I always do that when I'm not sure I'll stay. The rental sat under a flickering streetlight, waiting, just like I'd planned. Outside, the air was cool and dry. The sky above Austin was clear. No clouds, no wind, no noise except for the low hum of traffic and my own breath in my ears. I got into my car, shut the door, and sat for a moment with my hands still on the steering wheel. And then, I let it out, but not in the way you'd think. I didn't cry, didn't scream, I just exhaled. One long, shaking breath that felt like it had been stuck in my chest since I was 8 years old. I pulled out my phone, opened my video folder, found the file titled Unsent. It had been recorded weeks ago, in one of the sterile little therapy rooms with neutral walls and too many tissues. I hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Dr. Patel, not even my best friend. It wasn't for them, it wasn't even for him, it was for me. A way to say all the things I'd never been allowed to say, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not for revenge, but for release. I hit send. The file uploaded and disappeared into the cloud, destined for one very specific inbox. Robert, Langston Dynamics. Calm. That's all. No subject line, no message. Just a box on a stage, and a voice waiting in the dark. The ballroom had returned to its rhythm. Soft jazz floated through the speakers again. Glasses refilled. Laughter resumed, though slightly more restrained now, as if the air had shifted and everyone felt it, even if they couldn't explain. At the head table, Rob sat. He hadn't said a word since she walked off the stage. No quip, no clever remark. Just a faint twitch of the jaw and a long silence that seemed unfamiliar even to him. Eventually, curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, moved his hand. He untied the white ribbon, lifted the lid. Inside, lying in black velvet, was a small silver Apollo rocket, no longer pristine. The paint had chipped. One fin was crooked. It looked handmade, imperfect, and impossibly familiar. He stared at it. For a moment, he didn't move. Then something flickered behind his eyes. A memory. Emily, 12 years old, holding out the rocket with both hands, her smile cautious, her voice proud. He remembered brushing past her that day, phone pressed to his ear, thinking she'd simply cobbled it together from spare parts she wasn't supposed to touch. He never asked how long she'd worked on it. He never said thank you. Now, all these years later, that same rocket sat in his hands. Still here. still standing, still pointed upward, still waiting to be seen. Beneath it, he found a note. Just one line, written in Emily's unmistakable handwriting. I learned to fly because you never looked up. His hand tightened around the card. And then, her voice. It came not from the stage, but from behind him, amplified through the speakers, now buzzing with static, just before the screen behind the stage flickered to life. At first, people thought it was part of the gala program, a surprise tribute. Then her face appeared. Emily. No makeup, no stage lighting, just her, direct, calm, unshaken. She looked straight into the lens, and her voice rang through the ballroom. If you're seeing this, then I've already said goodbye. Not to you, but to the version of me that kept waiting. The room fell silent again. Forks froze midair. Conversations died in throats. The only sound was her voice. The little girl who brought you trophies. The teenager who tried to fit your mold. The woman who built systems that reached the stars. She kept waiting for a nod. A look. One single word that said she mattered. She's gone now. Someone near the back let out a soft gasp. Another dabbed at their eyes with a napkin. Robert's hand was still on the rocket, but now it was trembling. I used to think I needed your permission to matter, to take up space, to soar. But now I know. I never needed your belief. I just needed to believe in myself. Her voice didn't crack, not once. But something in the room did. Across tables of board members and longtime colleagues, people lowered their eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some blinked back tears. No one clapped. No one moved. And Robert? He looked smaller than he ever had. Not because he was ashamed, but because for the first time, he had no script. He had built rockets that pierced the stratosphere. But in this moment, he was just a man holding the wreckage of something he never saw coming. Her face lingered on screen for one final second, eyes steady, no anger, no hatred, only truth. Then the screen went black. The next morning, I drove without really thinking. No GPS, no destination typed into my phone. I just followed something. Maybe instinct, maybe muscle memory. Before I knew it, I was parked in front of Maplewood Elementary, the school I hadn't seen in over 20 years. It looked smaller now, the way childhood places always do. The fence had been painted over, the jungle gym replaced with something safer, shinier, but the swing set? Still there. Same chipped paint, same rusted chains, same crooked seat that always leaned just a little to the left. I walked across the dew-covered grass and sat down. It didn't creak. It groaned, like it remembered me. I didn't swing, I just sat, letting the cold metal seep through my coat, letting the silence stretch. No tears. Not this time, not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be seen. I wasn't fighting to be heard. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged. I was just there, whole. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, typed slowly, carefully, like carving something into stone. Legacy is not inherited, it's chosen. I stared at the sentence for a long time, then locked the screen. That's when I noticed him. A man across the playground, maybe in his 30s, pushing a little girl on the other swing set. He caught my eye and smiled politely. Not flirty, not awkward, just human. I smiled back. It wasn't a moment meant for a movie, not a metaphor, not the start of anything, but it was something new. A stranger had seen me, and it didn't hurt. Eventually, I stood, brushed the dirt from my coat, took one last look at the swing, and all the memories still caught in its rusted frame, then turned and walked toward the street. I didn't walk fast. I didn't walk with purpose. I just walked. For once, not toward anything, but away. From everything that didn't serve me anymore.